I will start by introducing everyone. To my immediate right is Mr. Roby Parsons, Mr. John Mullen, Jeb Bradley, Mr. White, John White, Mr. Lawrence D. Brown. Is that the correct way to cover it?
Once I left New York, I settled back to Larry.
Okay, thank you. And Candace Cole McCrae. Thank you. The ground rules are opening statement for everyone. Then we would take questions from the group or questions from a member of our audience, followed by probably a 5-minute closing statement for each one of the candidates. That way they can cover any point that wasn't raised in either their opening statement or questions. We've, as gentlemen, given Candace Cole McCrae first position. Candace, you want it or you want to defer?
I'd like to defer.
It's just like football, you know, you can receive or defer.
I just came from a funeral.
Understood, thank you. Roby, would you like to start?
Thank you. I'm Roby Parsons. I live in South Milton, and I've been a state representative now for 4 years, and I'm running for my 3rd term. I've been involved locally before I moved to Milton in the Rochester School Board, Dover Adult Learning Center. I was on the board of directors for 6 years. And I've been involved in Milton in several boards, economic development, the planning board, and as I say, as a state representative. I'm pretty clear as to where I stand on a number of issues. One is I believe in smaller government, less taxes. We need to attract more business, which would be the less taxes, and make a more business-friendly climate. Less government intrusion, and which would give us more freedom to choose other things that I think are more important. We have to live within our means, statewide, just as we do with our own personal lives. And with that, I'll say that that's what I have to say this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Mullins.
Thank you. I'm John Mullen, and I'm one of your current elected state representatives, along with Representative Parsons here, and I'm running for my 2nd term. My 1st term was the current term that we're in, and I want to thank, first of all, Susan for setting this whole up. I remember back late summer, I said, when are you going to have this? So I appreciate that. I think this is a great forum. I want to say that the first 2 years as a state representative has been an honor to serve the people of Milton and Middleton, and I've tried to do my best in trying to control taxes, control spending, at the same time providing services for those who need. One of the things that I've tried to do in the 2 years is to, in my capacity, is to control spending. I'm not afraid of taxes. There's always going to be needs for services, but we got to control our spending. If we control our spending, we'll be able to control our taxes. I'm also an advocate of education, and I've really educated myself, or have been educated in the last couple of years, about our education funding within the state of New Hampshire. I think it's weak, and I think we need to do something more about it. There is legislation being muddled around right now to address some of these funding issues for construction. There's other issues on the table in terms of curriculum, but right now I have a piece of legislation that is in the queue, if you will, to try to release the moratorium on new school construction. I think it's very important that we find a way to fund this, not only for the schools within New Hampshire that need some help, but it's critical, I think, to the 2 communities that we have here in Middleton and Milton. I think they need some help. I'm also for local control of schools and local choice. I think we should give the parents the right to make a choice and support that choice. Most of the roadblocks in terms of achieving our goals in the state, I think most of them have to do with regulation and our spending, and I think we need to find ways to do that, and if we do that, we encourage business. If we encourage business, more businesses will come in here, more jobs will be available, more people have more money to spend on their needs and wants. Finally, no matter what we do, I think as a legislature, no matter what our political affiliation is, we need to work together as a group, not as separate, to solve the problems that we have in New Hampshire. And if we do that, I think we'll benefit all. So thank you.
Mr. Bradley?
Well, thank you very much, Chris, for moderating this afternoon. Thank you, Susan, for organizing this. It's been a pleasure to have participated, I believe, in 2 or 3 of these forums here in Milton, and I am very happy to be here again. My name is Jeff Bradley. I live in Wolfboro. It's been an honor to have served in a lot of different capacities over the years in the New Hampshire House, the U.S. House, as well as now in the State Senate. But first, a little bit about me. My wife and I, Barbara and I, live in Wolfboro. We have owned several small businesses over the years. We have 4 grown children and 1 new granddaughter that was born on Easter Sunday. All 4 of our children live outside of New Hampshire, 3 in Colorado and 1 in Washington. Barbara and I owned a natural food store for many years. I was a painting contractor and did some real estate development, so I know what it means as a small business owner, or former small business owner, to meet a payroll. Why am I running again? It's fairly simple. I believe in public service first and foremost, and I think that we need to continue to stress a couple of very fundamental priorities. While we have a relatively low unemployment rate, which I believe is a result of the fact that we have neither a sales tax or an income tax, we've become less competitive as a state when it comes to either relocating businesses here or growing businesses here, because we have some high-cost centers. We have among the highest business taxes in the country, very high workers' compensation costs. We have high unemployment insurance costs. And when you combine those costs on businesses with our high electric rates and our high health care costs, we have had very limited economic growth over the years. So to me, the top priority is jobs, as it's always been for me. And secondly, I bring a protect taxpayers mentality to the State House. Not only have I always opposed an income tax and a sales tax, but I've fought for lower taxes, fought to get rid of the LLC tax, for instance, which was nothing more than an additional tax on business owners' income. Over the years, as I said before, have served in the New Hampshire House, where I was known for leading efforts to lower electric rates, as well as pass environmental legislation. When I served as a member of Congress, I served on the Veterans Committee, and twice was honored as the New Hampshire Veterans of Foreign Wars Citizen of the Year for my efforts to improve veterans' health care. I worked to open a new veterans outpatient clinic in Somersworth, as well as to keep the emergency room at the VA Center in Manchester open. Along with a lot of other people in the congressional delegation at the time and citizens throughout Maine and New Hampshire, I fought to save 5,000 jobs at the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard when the shipyard was under dire threat of closure. A lot of people know that I'm a big hiker. I think one of my more lasting achievements has been to create a new wilderness area in the White Mountain National Forest, as well as expand another wilderness area. And more recently in the Senate, I have fought to get spending under control, to pass a bipartisan budget in the last years that did not raise taxes and fees but met the needs of the state of New Hampshire, pass a health care plan that again was bipartisan, that has opened the door for low-income New Hampshire residents to have better access to affordable health care while at the same time providing key taxpayer protection. So I look forward to an opportunity to discuss these issues with all of you this afternoon and ask for your vote on November 4th. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you. John White.
I'm John R. White. I also live in Wolfboro. I'm running for the Senate seat in the 3rd District. My background is newspapers. I was an activist journalist at the Boston Globe, a consumer advocate, founded what's possibly the first consumer column of a newspaper in this country back in around 1966. And for 20 some odd years was the automotive editor down there, writing about the industry, about automobiles and automobile quality and handling consumer complaints. I got into politics actively in Wolfboro in 2008, and I haven't looked back. If I go to the Senate, one of my primary concerns is to raise the minimum wage. We've heard a lot of talk about business, business, business. The lifeblood of business is its labor force. And right now, there's no reason to come to New Hampshire to work, where the minimum is now the federal minimum of $7.25. You cannot exist on $7.25 an hour and a 40-hour week, assuming you could get 40 hours of work. It isn't just teenagers that make minimum wage, although some of the statistics are skewed by the temporary workers in the summer who skedaddle for college in the fall. But the fact is that almost 75% of those people earning minimum wage are over 20 years of age or over. 59% are women, 14% of children, 32% are working full-time on minimum wage. These people are heads of families working at minimum wage. And it isn't just small business, mom and pop stores. You go around and you ask some of the small businesses what they pay. I was in a bakery yesterday, and I asked what they pay. They start their people at $9.25. They can't compete. They can't get anybody at $7.25. Some very large corporations pay the minimum, like Walmart. And Walmart offers another benefit, of course. They'll help you get food stamps. We subsidize those low wages. Now, we had a minimum wage in New Hampshire that was above the federal level for a while, and it was on the senator's watch that it disappeared. Senator Bradley tells you he's defending you against taxes. Well, he's defending some people against taxes. The LLC tax, the tobacco tax, which resulted in a windfall for business, the tobacco sellers who raised their prices when we lowered the tax, cost us $20 million. But he hasn't done much about real estate taxes, and in fact, having voted for budgets that severely impacted towns and cities by reducing aid to cities and towns, reducing aid to education, it's put upward pressure on real estate taxes. That's why it was announced in the paper this week that Tufton Borough's real estate taxes are going up 16%. The fact of the matter is, if you cut a tax, you cut the state's revenue. And there's no wiggle room in the state budget. We balance the budget and just barely. So if you cut taxes, you cut services. Ask Senator Bradley what services he will cut to pay for the tax cuts he proposes. Send me to Concord. I'll watch the pennies. But my heart is with the working people and the homeowners in this state. I'm not that worried about business. Business does okay here. As a matter of fact, New Hampshire is rated pretty well as a business-friendly state. So I'm here to ask you for your vote to make a change. Thank you.
Point, thank you. Mr. Brown.
Larry Brown. Actually, Lawrence Duncan, son of Dalton Monroe, grandson of Martin Luther, great-grandson of John Dalton Brown, and then we moved back into dim history where it may have been Horace Thomas. It says H-O-R-T-H. It may have been horse thief. A Brown family been here for a long time in New Hampshire. We used to be farmers. My father made it to Dartmouth. I grew up out of state because of health insurance. My mother didn't have any. She was a young widow, moved back with her family. I got small town government. I got a great public education, Regent Scholarship, came back to New Hampshire where my father's family lived for 200 years. Been said, give back. When you give back, there are three things to give back to: family, community, and school. If you review the history of recent law, recent Senate votes, recent House votes, you will find that on the O'Brien-led Republican side of things, it has been against funding for public education, against family, and against community. L-chip has gone down. We have four wonderful gems in this community, of which the old town hall in Milton is one. They're not being funded the way they should be. We're looking at a tax diversion of close to $4 million by the end of 2015 for public education funds diverted as a business tax to private schools. That's not good for public education. Funding for construction has gone down. A new bill to bring it back will go forward on a bipartisan basis. Three things: fair share funding for K through 12, K through 20, for UNH, the tech colleges, for job retraining, for new job skills in the changing world we all face, both present workers and children. For family security, fair pay, equal pay, health care coverage, full access to it. That's a code phrase for women's reproductive rights, health care and full access to it. No wait list for the disabled youth of our community who are leaving school. Child care access and treatment for drug and alcohol abuse. For communities, roads and bridges that we travel on. Roads and bridges for tourists, roads and bridges for business, roads and bridges for us to get to work in our daily lives. Without those things, there is no community, there is no public school, and a family struggles. If you want those three things, fair share funding, family security, and support for community, vote me back. It would be my fourth term. Do I have time left?
No.
I'm done.
But let me be fair in saying you're right in the middle of the time spectrum that the previous candidates have used. So.
I'm Candace Coleman-Cray. I've lived in Milton since 1990, early 1990s. I have done a lot of things in my professional life, including being a teacher and a therapist, a counselor, a farmer, many things. My husband was alive. We had our own farm. I've raised biological children, stepchildren, foster children, and adopted children. And so, and my last son is here with me. The reason I'm running, there's two reasons I'm running, and I'll get into them further. And when we have the second round. But I'm from, as many people up here, some of the people up here anyway, I'm from New York State originally. And in New York State, one of the things that we saw over the years was the megatropolises bleeding the rural communities to death. And so, in any time you look for votes in New York, you see all the rural and small communities starving and bleeding to death, and the megatropolises growing. And I have been seeing this happen in New Hampshire. And so one of the things I want to do is I want to work to, if I get elected, I want to work to create a power block of other representatives and senators from rural and small communities so that we can vote together on issues. Otherwise, our 1 or 2 votes from each town is insignificant compared to the larger whole that comes out of the relationship between Concord, Manchester, Nashua, and UNH. I sit on many councils, and I watch where the money goes, and I watch what happens, and it's led me to realize that I have to work on another level, and that brings me here. Thank you.
That's good, thank you. I don't see any. I'm going to start off one, and it's kind of a generic one. The state of New Hampshire this past year increased the gas tax by, I believe, 4 cents per gallon. I'd like to find out from the candidates, there's been some discussion out there that it was bad to raise taxes. Other side says, well, it's good because it's infused money into the roads program. How do you stand on the gas tax as a funding mechanism? Did you support the recent raise? Toby?
I voted against it because I think it's counterproductive. First of all, to go into the highway fund. The highway fund, everyone says, is a dedicated fund. It is anything but a dedicated fund. There are 3 or 4 entities that derive their budgets from it. The largest one, I believe, is the state police. They should get their budget just like everyone else does through the general fund. And I think that this is just, there are other dedicated funds, and they're not truly dedicated either. So, as I say, I voted against it. I think it's counterproductive, and it doesn't go for what it's supposed to go for anyway. And as far as the roads and so forth, 93, everybody mentions 93, we get a big proportion of our funding from the federal government. The federal government, right now, the highway fund is broke. So we can put our 20% in or whatever it is, but we're not going to get our 80%. So that's going a little bit farther, but I did oppose the gas tax for several reasons. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Mullen?
I oppose the gas tax also for similar reasons. But I felt that the imposition of the gas tax, although it was sold as helping communities with their roads, about 42% went to finish I-93. Another percentage, a small amount, but some of it did to reduce the tolls or eliminate the tolls in Merrimack. So the funds, some of it went to the state police. I think state police on a road toll tax, which is the gas tax, is somewhere around 30, takes about 33%, 34%, of which included in there are the traffic courts. So really, in terms of road construction, we only have 66%. That being said, however, I think the Department of Transportation needs to do a better job in allocating their funds. You know, in terms of repair, their 10-year plan, I'm not sure is the best way to do this. Obviously, we can see in Milton here, we had 125 done nicely. I was told by the engineer, the district engineer for District 6, which is sitting here, thank you very much for the 4% gas tax that was in there. I'm not sure if that did it because the gas tax just went into effect. The gas tax isn't affecting anybody right now because the price of gas is dropping dramatically. But it affects not only your individual gas tax, but it affects everything that comes into New Hampshire, moves around in New Hampshire. And I just felt that at this time, that's not the right way to go.
All right, thank you.
Thank you for the question, Chris. I also did not support the 4% increase in the gas tax, but I think, in agreeing with my colleagues, there's almost no question we do need to get more money into the highway fund. There had been a proposal to raise the gas tax by 15 cents a gallon. It was scaled back to 4 cents, and that passed. There was also a proposal to introduce either 1 or more casinos into New Hampshire. That failed. And then the third, which is what I favor, way to increase money into the highway fund is to end the diversion of money to other purposes. It's one thing to use highway fund dollars potentially to pay for the state police and highway safety. It's another thing totally to use highway fund dollars to pay for the administration of the Department of Safety. And there's an awful lot of money that's being diverted away from necessary road and bridge repair right now to pay for administrative purposes. So my legislation, which passed the Senate, unfortunately didn't pass in the House, would have in the next budget begun the process of ending that diversion of dedicated funds. And I believe that before we ask hard-working taxpayers, working families, small businesses, to dig ever deeper into their pockets to pay for whether it's road and bridge repair or any other necessary function, if it's a dedicated fund, those funds should be dedicated to the purpose, not for administrative costs. And so I, assuming the voters choose to send me back to Concord on November 4th, will reintroduce the same legislation to push the end of this diversion so that we can repair our roads and bridges without having to burden people with another 10 or 12 or 15 cent gas tax increase.
Thank you. Mr. White?
I like the way things get labels. Diversion. It's not a diversion. It was set up by law. The same funds that would pay to pave the roads would pay to police the roads. I don't understand how you separate the administration of the state police from the state police who patrol the roads. I need that explained to me. But I supported that 4.2% increase. It hadn't been, the gas tax hadn't been raised in this state in 20 some odd years. We were the lowest state in New England and still are. We have to pay for the roads somehow. Since the last time the gas tax was raised, the cost of asphalt has gone up 300 to 400%. Salt has gone up 400%. You can't pave a mile of highway for the same price now as you did in 1991. We have to adjust these taxes to pay for it, unless you have a better way to pay. I mean, how else do you improve the infrastructure if you don't raise revenue to do it? If you don't pay it in a gas tax, you'll pay it like I did this year in car repairs. Broken brake lines, suspension parts, tires. It cost me $2 grand on my truck this year. The price of driving on bad roads.
Mr. Brown?
It should be pointed out that Mr. White has a Ford.
Well, the Chevrolets don't fare nearly as well as that old Ford does.
More seriously, I want the rest of my time back. Beginning with November 29th, 1938, Article 6A, which is the absolute constitutional language that funds the legislation we're talking about, the 4.2 cent gas tax taking effect July 1st of this year, not raised since 1993. Do the quick math. Divide 20 years by 4 cents, and you get 1/5 of a penny over 20 years. If you drive 12,000 miles a year, if you get 20 miles to the gallon, it's going to cost you $2 a month not to blow out a tire, not to do your suspension. You have here the absolute dedication of the revenues to the state police, which patrol the highways, the traffic courts for the patrol of the highways. The Federal Department of Transportation estimates it's going to cost $983 billion to redo the national road system. The reason there's a 10-year plan is we have 4,500 miles of state roads. 500 miles a year times 10 years, you rebuild your roads every 10 years. After the state of New York, we have the worst pothole thaw-freeze cycle in the United States. 10 years puts us at the outside envelope. That money is going to I-93 for one very good reason. If you look at a demographic income transportation map of New Hampshire, you will find that 40% of the population is within a 15-mile radius of Manchester. 90,000 people go down from Manchester into New Hampshire for employment. The New Hampshire advantage is metropolitan Boston. I disagree with Candace. That is the economic engine that supports New Hampshire. It is foolhardy not to maintain and expand such a necessary commuters corridor going down into New Hampshire. Side point, I tend to keep newspaper articles. In December of 2010, you could buy a new Versa for $5,882. A brand new Versa right now in Foster's is going for just under $10,000. That's a $4,000 jump in price. And to say that we are going to live within our means by keeping spending down is a disastrous statement. There is no person in this room who is living within their means. Anybody have a credit card account? Anybody have a mortgage? Anybody have a refrigerator that they're buying on time? Okay? We are living beyond our means. I am probably the only person in this room who does not have a single dollar of consumer debt. And I am terrified for people who do not have access to minimum wage, people who are looking at the cost of transportation, people who are looking at bad roads that cannot get them to work safely. Bad roads do not bring tourists. That should be over my time.
Well used, well used. Candace?
Yes, when the 4-cent tax thing came up, I made an appointment with the Stratford County Commission for Transportation and Roads and went to one of their meetings and asked them a lot of questions. Because I wanted to know, I can see and agree with everything Larry said about the benefits to the state. But I wanted to know what happens for Milton? What happens for Middleton? That's where, I'm not trying to be a senator, but where my goal is the big picture. My goal is to be a state rep and to represent the goals of and the needs of Milton and Middleton. So I sat down with them and looked over their budget, and they said that they had received and would receive some of the monies coming in. And I said, where will it go? And they said, the roads from Durham to Newmarket. And I said, well, what about us? What about the small communities? And they said, well, this is where the population and this is where the money, this is where it goes. So at that point, I was very frustrated. I wouldn't mind a 4-cent tax increase if it filtered down to my community, to the communities we live in. If I could see that happened. I wouldn't mind if it was 10 cents, if we went down, if we saw it, the evidence of it improving our communities. But if it goes elsewhere, I have a problem with it because my job is, as I see my job, is to take care of the needs and keep Milton Mills as strong as possible.
All right, thank you. Back to the audience. Does anyone have a question they'd like to ask of the candidates? Not seeing any. Is there a question that the candidates would like their fellow candidates to answer? Yes, I realize now I've just opened up a can of dynamite. But, for instance, I asked about the gas tax only because as an engineer and a public works director, roads and bridges is what I live with every day. So that was my area of interest, if you will. Very surprised at the answers that came forth. educating not only to probably the public who's gonna see this tape, but to me too. Mr. Parsons?
I think that one issue will be brought up again this year in the general court, and that would be the issue of gambling. About gambling. Yeah, will come up again. I believe that people who were for it before are going to introduce it again, as they have several times. I voted against it. I think the gambling we have enough gambling in our state, you can almost bet on anything you want anyway. Some of the major players across the country are now going bankrupt, and the market as a whole is saturated and has been. When the head of an Indian tribe down from Connecticut says that we're defaulting on a $6 billion loan, expansion loan, and our members are going back to the federal government for assistance, there are some drastic things that are wrong with the gambling industry, and we don't need to be part of that. I think that we can get along just fine without it. And I think that at one point in the House, a medical expansion bill was put forth, and then it was debated that we needed the gambling to fund it. Well, that's like putting the cart before the horse. But anyway, they say my feelings, and I think it's very important, is that New Hampshire does not need any more gambling. We can virtually bet on anything in any town that you want, and some of even the bingo things are pretty hefty prices to them. At any rate, that's one issue that I think will come up again, and I thank you for that.
Yes, welcome. Mr. Mullen? Any comments on that, or?
On the gambling issue, I voted for gambling, and I looked at it in I think maybe a different way. I looked at the net effect. There are certainly costs involved with gambling in terms of abuse and so forth. However, we do gamble in the state. I can remember we had a bill up before us about Keno. I don't know if everybody knows what Keno is. Certainly from Massachusetts, certainly know what Keno is. And a colleague of mine said, well, I don't want to expand gambling, but I'll expand Keno. And I said, well, that's gambling. The lotto tickets are gambling. My point about gambling is we have a spending problem, and we've also talked here about a revenue problem. Gambling is not the panacea to answer all questions, and I support it in terms of the revenue that it would bring into the state, but I'm very cautious that that is not found revenue to spend more in addition to what we're doing. I would rather see that revenue that comes in to offset some of our the current needs in spending, which would reduce the burden of taxation or fees on the rest of the public. Again, it's a very touchy thing. I think the House was trying to initially limit it to one facility, and I think it came down to now, okay, it's one facility, but we'll look at more. I think will be a challenge, and I agree with my colleague, it will come up again, no matter who's there. There'll be the same advocates pushing for it. But again, I look at the net effect, be careful with what we receive, don't allocate it foolishly, but I think it's a revenue source that we should look at.
Thank you, Chris. I have not supported gambling in the past, and look forward to continuing with opposition to gambling. I think you've heard both sides of the coin debated here, but I come down on the fact that gambling is not likely to provide the revenue that people think it will. You need only look at what's happening in other states, New Jersey, Connecticut, as Mr. Parsons mentioned, that the revenues expected are underperforming. To me, that's a very real problem. If gambling is allowed in the state, and it would not be with my vote, I hope it is dedicated to long-term capital projects that are not as necessary for funding on a day-to-day basis. That might make it more acceptable to some people, but I also think that there are social costs to gambling, and the promise just hasn't been met. So I would continue to not support it.
Thank you.
Fine, this is a rare moment of agreement between me and Senator Bradley.
Wanna hold hands?
No, we don't need to do it. But, I am very much opposed to casino gambling. I would never vote for the introduction into New Hampshire of a business that has its roots in organized crime. And as Representative Parsons has so ably pointed out, it's no sure bet, if you'll pardon the pun. 2 casinos folded a couple of weeks ago in Atlantic City. If you go around and you look at the areas where these casinos are, you'll see that they always pick poor places. There's a casino up in Windsor, Ontario that was going to be the wonder of that province and relieve a lot of city problems in Windsor. It's in the middle of a slum, and it looks pretty shabby. And if you go to these places, you don't find the free-spending high rollers. You see rows of desperate people throwing their quarters into machines or throwing their tokens into machines in the hopes of hitting something big. It's the poorest among us looking for that last chance, that last hope. They're the same people that stand in line and buy $40 worth of lottery tickets when they're on food stamps. It brings with it too many problems, too much social disruption, and I would never vote for casino gambling, or I would never vote to legalize any kind of gambling in this state.
Mr. Brown?
That, I don't know the lyrics for Kumbaya, but I'm another no voter for gambling. From a different perspective, I was a social worker for several years, and I have seen the desperation and destruction that comes to families. I don't like it. I left social work and went into job rehab instead, because in job rehab you're trying to build something. Here in Stratford County, Kachiko, $250,000 they can't account for on just lucky sevens. I don't think New Hampshire is that clever a state that we can compete with the big boy lawyers that the casinos have. I think for every 2 rules that we come up with, they will have 3 ways to get around it. That's apart from the income. Regarding the income, a letter that Foster's did not publish started out, Atlantic City's bad news is good news for New Hampshire. Just think, 4 dead casinos sitting on the beach in Atlantic City like beached whales waiting to be towed up to New Hampshire and make money. The only problem is a dead whale tends to stink no matter what beach it's on. They didn't publish the letter. But I think you see the point. We went down to the wonderful Longwood Gardens in Pennsylvania, came back through Bethlehem, and the little newspaper there, all the back pages were filled with photographers advising the local girls how they too could get their hair makeup done. I don't like that.
Candace?
I'm half Mohawk. I'm from a reservation. And the reservation fought for many years amongst themselves about whether to do the casino or not. In one area of the reservation, they did finally decide to put in a casino. The casino has made us much poorer as a people than were before. You know, the assumption was it was going to build schools and hospitals and all kinds of things. It didn't. The money was eaten up in policing and roads and caring for the problems, social problems that occurred. And so we were much worse off than we had been. if we had left that demon in its box. Personally, I also am not for gambling. However, even though I personally am not for or against something, it will not determine how I vote. What will determine how I vote is what the people in Milton, Middleton, and Milton Mills want from me.
All right, bring it back to the audience. Does anyone in the audience have any questions? Ellen?
I have a question. I had kind of an interesting experience. I've been working the campaigns and canvassing. And this afternoon, I canvassed just one street in Milton, and I had almost 10 houses for sale. How do we address that? Because the people that I spoke to aren't moving to New Hampshire somewhere. They're moving out of state because they can't afford the real estate taxes. One individual told me that there was a non-accepted, who has a non-accepted road in town that's not plowed, it's not paved, it's not anything. Lives on the lake, the taxes are extreme. How would you all address? This man was moving, not to New Hampshire. Robbie? Roby, I should know that, sorry.
To me, this is a multifaceted problem. Our college graduates, for instance, a good portion of them are leaving the state because we don't have jobs. It comes back to the economy and jobs, in my mind. If we can bring in, as we have in Rochester, companies that are international and that are multi-billion-dollar and multinational companies that pay good wages, and then we have an education system that starts to cater to them to meet the needs of what is called the STEM, which is science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And I believe that the university system, along with the community college system, are starting to address that. But without the companies coming to New Hampshire and making an incentive for them to come, and as someone else mentioned, we are the highest tax, or one of the highest tax states for industry, for business in the country. It's good for the individual, but it's not good for business. And as a small business owner, there is one tax that and I'm being facetious about this, is the business enterprise tax. If I'm making a good profit, I'll pay a profits tax and I won't moan and groan about it. But when I have to pay a tax for other things, no matter whether I make a profit or not, that's not good. And the other thing is, we are losing business. We've lost Strom Ruger. They should have been here for the expansion, and I believe that they will ultimately close their plants in Newport and move to their new facility in the south. And that brings up a very sensitive subject, and one of the major criteria that they were looking at was the right to work. And the right to work is not a union busting thing. It just gives the individual a choice that if they want to have and be represented by a union or other group, that they certainly can. And if they don't want to, then they don't have to. But to me, there's so much to this. And if people are making good jobs, as they will down in Rochester, and if we can bring in other business and not lose the Strom Rugers that are here, then I think we will have a very, very vibrant economy and a good educational system besides. Thank you.
Thank you. I agree with my colleague here. It really it's an economic situation. It boils down to the availability of good paying jobs, and they are leaving the state because there are not enough businesses here with good paying jobs. Good paying jobs come into communities. They're able to keep their homes and pay the taxes on the property taxes. We need to develop some kind of plan within the state, and we don't have an economic plan. We don't. I'm on the committee of Resources, Recreation and Development, which oversees DRED, which is an awful name, Department of Resource and Economic Development. It's dreadful. They don't have an economic plan. They spend a lot of time on parks and so forth, but they don't seem to develop a plan to stop the bleeding of our young people leaving the state. And this state is getting older, and we need to do things within the state to reducing some of the business taxes, some of the regulations to encourage businesses to come in here to provide jobs. And I think that's the result of, you see a lot of for sale signs up. It's my personal opinion also that the market is picking up. And yet in that particular instance there, I'm sure the gentleman is just tired of paying the taxes and he wants to move out, or can't afford to pay the taxes. So, but I think you'll see a lot of properties up for sale that are up for sale because people see an opportunity to move to a different place. Not saying that's the total situation. It's a very complex situation on why housing inventory goes up or goes down.
Thank you very much. I, as a former small business owner, know what it means to meet a payroll. And the answer, I think, to your question is, how do we develop jobs in the state of New Hampshire? I'm pleased that I've been endorsed by the National Federation of Independent Businesses, one of the largest organizations that represents small businesses in the state of New Hampshire and nationwide. Small business is the backbone of our economy. It's what makes us go as a state. I was endorsed this morning by the New Hampshire Home Builders Association. Home building represents a lot of people with a lot of jobs. And I don't think that there's a clearer difference between myself, who's always fought for jobs, than my opponent, who has already today said he's not worried about business. Well, if you're not worried about business, this state is going to continue to have a problem. And he's already indicated in previous forums he supports an income tax. An income tax is the lifeblood of the New Hampshire advantage, but it's not enough. As I indicated in my opening remarks, we've got high business taxes, high workers' comp costs, high electric rates, high health care costs. These are all things that I've fought to improve over the years. And if we're going to make a state that attracts young people, allows people to have high-paying jobs with good benefits, we have to recognize that small business is the backbone of our state. We can't have an income tax, as my opponent wants. We can't have the highest minimum wage in the United States of America, which my opponent wants. The NFIB, I don't know if any of you read the Concord Monitor today. They said, point blank, having a minimum wage increase is a job killer because it passes costs on to small businesses. If we do that, you will see continued out-migration of people from the state of New Hampshire. That's a problem. That's why I want to go back and fight all of these things that have become anti-business over the last couple of decades, and I'll continue to do that.
Mr. White.
Well, as I told you before, I have a newspaper background, and the specialty in the newspaper business is to separate the bologna from the beef. And by God, we've just heard a lot of bologna here today. First of all, on right to work, it is not it is not saying that right to work is right to work for less money. This is, if not a union busting regulation, it would be a union depressing regulation. All that is required now, if you are a union member, is that you pay either your union dues as a full member or pay an agency fee to cover the cost of negotiating your contract and the benefits you enjoy. That's fairness. Nobody said you have to join the union. That's not so. If, however, you work in a union shop and you enjoy the benefits of the contract and you're making more than minimums out there and you have benefits, then it's only reasonable that you would pay an agency fee the cost of the representation for it. Second, if taxes and unions, and there's only about 11% of the workforce in this state unionized, if taxes and unions were a bar to good business and good jobs, the state of California would be a desert. They have very high business taxes, and they have a lot of unions, and they also have Silicon Valley. California is doing pretty well. But what California has that we don't have is a university system that is well funded and can support research. We don't have that. We have a legislature that in 2011 cut the university budget by 46%. That certainly doesn't encourage research. Cut aid to cities and towns, cut services all over the place, and cut some taxes. Now you can't have it all. You're either going to have to raise the revenue to pay for the services you want, or you're going to have to give up the services. It's as simple as that. Now, that person is leaving the state like a lot of people are. Our biggest export is young people. There's nothing here for them. A $7.25 minimum wage is not going to keep the college graduate in New Hampshire. Now, Senator Bradley says, I want an income tax. Well, that's partly true. What I want is a tax overhaul to shift the burden. What I would prefer is a whole overhaul which would eliminate the state portion of the real estate tax immediately and use as one leg of the stool to support the revenue an income tax. Short of a whole overhaul, I would accept just a tit-for-tat exchange. Get rid of the real estate, the state share of the real estate tax, and you have an income tax. I would exempt family income below $60,000. Now, what does that do? If you get relief on the real estate tax and you're below that $60,000 or $50,000 threshold, whatever the legislature might decide on, you get relief on your real estate taxes and you're not paying an income tax. But if you're making $1 million a year, if you're making above $60,000, you and those 23 or 27,000 millionaires, whoever figures you want to take, will be paying their share. Right now, New Hampshire is a tax haven. People flock here from out of state. Military retirees, millionaires, they come up here, they pay real estate taxes, but they keep those low by voting against all sorts of things like schools, school budgets. And they tell you taxes are bad for you. They pay them someplace else, but when they come here, they don't want to pay them. No, you can't have it all. Those people should have to pay their share. And the widows who are inherited their home, the low-income families who have a trailer or some sort of real estate, those people who are retired here, those people who inherited property here, who are now being taxed out of their homes, they need relief. Senator Bradley would give relief to business. And God knows there are some business taxes, like the business enterprise tax, which are unfair. But I put it to you that the whole tax structure in this state is unfair. The Constitution demands that taxes be levied proportionately. We do not do that. If you make $20,000 or less in this state, you pay 8 to 10% of your income in taxes. Cost you the same as for a gallon of gas as it cost Senator Bradley. You'll pay the same tax on that gas. If you make $1 million or more, you're paying less than 2%. And if you're making the 5 million or 6 million, you're paying even less than 1%. Is that fair? I suggest that if we do not address this now and stop with the nonsense about no income tax, we can't, that's no advantage for anybody except the very rich. That's the fairest way to collect a tax. Sooner or later, enough revenue will be needed that we can't supply, that we will come to a crisis. We won't be able to pave the roads. We won't be able to pay the school teachers. We won't be able to do much of anything because we have to keep cutting spending while inflation goes up. And when that occurs, what you'll get is an add-on income tax and maybe a sales tax that'll be thrown together in a hurry, added to this jerry-rigged tax structure we have now, in which we have a constant problem balancing our budgets. So wouldn't it be prudent to look at the whole picture instead of pitting business against labor and this one against that one? Look at the whole structure and see what's fair. Stop with the labels. Income tax is not poison. Income tax properly levied and properly administered is a fair way to collect revenue. And you can eliminate some of the unfair ways, like that business enterprise tax.
Mr. Brown.
Thank you. This is a map that you cannot see. It is a map with Cape Cod down at the bottom and a red line going up to the northwest, which is the Route 28, which is the I-93, equivalent of Silicon Valley, the technology corridor for Massachusetts and New Hampshire. This is material that came from the New England Economic Partnership in November 2013, so it's a little bit dated. However, it's in print. I trust its accuracy. And it says that the Tax Foundation, which is not a commie pinko liberal group, I don't think, calls the Business Climate Index for New Hampshire what number out of 50? Any takers? 8th. 8th. Out of 50. We are in the top 10 for an overall business climate. Here are some numbers. Memorize them. 8.6, 7.4, 6.6, 6.0, 5.2, 4.2, and my ever favorite 2.4. And that is the actual tax rate from the bottom to the top that we pay in New Hampshire on income. You get to the top 1%, you're looking at 2.4%. Anecdotal validity is very true for the person who has the problem. It says nothing about the broad picture. We don't know the age of the person, we don't know their resources, we don't know what they paid for the property, what they're willing to take as an issue. We don't know their job skills, members of the family, or any other information. Without that kind of detail, you can't answer an anecdotal question. What you can talk about is the overall tax structure of New Hampshire. There is a circuit breaker right now. If you make below, I believe, 42,500, there is a reduction on the state property tax for the homestead. If you make more than $4,800 in interest and dividend income, you pay a 5% tax on that. If you are one of the 90,500 people who go down from Manchester into Massachusetts every day, if you are one of the 9,000 people who go down from Maine, if you are one of the 5,000 people who go down from Vermont, you pay a Massachusetts income tax. And there are 90,000 people in New Hampshire who are willing to pay that income tax for the benefits of employment and the money that is generated by the economic engine of Massachusetts. We are not going to get that kind of business here in Milton or Middleton. Chris is both a civil engineer and former planning board person, did wonderful pro bono work trying to lay out Boland Road. He did not always have graying hair. Trying to lay out Boland Road so property owners would come together and make it into a legal Class 5 road that the town could take over ownership and pave it. Didn't happen. That's a side issue for discussion of taxes, but this is local programming. That's enough.
Candace?
I'm thinking of a number of things here. I'm thinking first of 20 years ago, when I was on a statewide task force, and we were looking at the fact that New Hampshire would be losing many jobs as we look forward in the future, as corporations were international and could go elsewhere and could take many jobs elsewhere. And what were we going to do? And what kind of employment and enterprises could we come up with that would keep international organizations employing people in our state? 20 years ago we were looking at this. We knew what was going to happen. I have a Spanish friend who says Americans burn hot on short fuses. We carry something for a little while and we let it go into something else. Well, we let this thing go. I have a brother who is now retired vice president of a Fortune 500 company. You would have never known it because their main office was a 3-room built place in a building in Dover. And they only had 4 people who ever were there, while all of their factories were in Mexico and China and everywhere else. So they came here on purpose to escape money. It was a cheap place. They had an apartment, and the people who were here, whoever was here, got to stay in that apartment, and 1 or 2 people ran that little bit of office. But that was the headquarters of this office, for the whole company, Fortune 500 company, sitting right here in New Hampshire. The other thing is I am a colleague of a very famous family in New Hampshire that is very wealthy. They have taken every one of their houses, their lake that they own, etc., and declared them as historical properties. So they make no property tax on these mansions, while we're paying, either our fuel, our dentist bill, or our property tax. They make nothing. That's how they get by, and they have hundreds of acres in New Hampshire, and that's just one family that goes on. Okay, so we have a mess. It's been a long time coming, and it's going to be worse. My son has some handouts. One of the things I sit on a council looking forward at the demographics in the state of New Hampshire, and yes, if you hand out the one, are we old? Okay, would you hand that out, please? All right, and there's something happening. As we look forward, the problem that we have now is actually going to be worse. And here, you can hand it to the people at the front table too, please. As we look at the projected silver, they call it a silver tsunami in New Hampshire. We're aging. It isn't that aging people are coming in here, it's that we're staying and aging and young people are not staying. And we have a lower birth rate. So the population projections are that this is going to be a much bigger problem. We're going to have a lot of seniors sitting here. In fact, according to the Public Policy Studies, Center for Public Policy, we're going to have a higher ratio of seniors than any other state. I always thought it would be Florida, but it isn't. It's us. Thank you. And if you turn to the second page, you see that our workforce is aging as well. And if the workforce ages, and then we've got a very small amount of youth coming up, like if the workforce are the people who pay the taxes. If they don't pay the taxes, we don't support anything or services. So as they age, and we're still here, there's gonna be less for us. Then if you look at the third page, you see a great big white triangle on nursing home care, projected nursing home care. And the nursing home care, most of the money comes from our property taxes and comes through our county. Now, one of the things that, now if you pass out the State Committee on Aging paper and the balancing incentive paper, I'm on the State Committee on Aging. And we looked at, a recent study found that New Hampshire rates 46 nationally incentive funds committed to community services. And it talks about how our counties are major funding for long-term services, and our property taxes do this. Before, I want to have the opportunity to talk about the next handout, but I don't want to take too much long, so we could stop or what.
All right. Thank you, Candace. The time's getting, we've been at it an hour and 15 minutes. We've had some very good discussion, comments. At this time, we're going to, unless I see a strong wave of hands from the audience, I'm going to give each candidate 5 minutes to wrap up a closing statement for anything that they would want us to state that was missed or that they didn't get to cover in their opening comments. And the right side of my table has conceded to let the left hand of the side of the table go first, because they've had the opportunity to answer each one of the questions that's been raised or positions that's been raised first. So with that, Mr. White, you have the table. Yes.
All right, you know who I am, and you've heard pretty much what I stand for. I do put it to you that the minimum wage in the state is too low. The federal minimum wage is too low. And that if we can raise that minimum wage, it will not be an avalanche of lost jobs. That has been disproved long ago. Every time the minimum wage has been raised in this country, the gross national product has increased. There's been a spurt of economic activity. And why is that so? Because you're putting money in the pockets of the poorest of the poor. And what do poor people do with money? They spend it because they have to. They need things. There is no luxury available here in a savings account or buying stock. They will spend for the necessities. I have explained to you my tax proposal. If that makes me out a tax boogeyman, as I've been charged with being, well, so be it. I don't think so. I think being for a fair distribution of the tax burden makes me intelligent. Now, Senator Bradley spends a lot of time talking about taxes and protecting taxes. And he has talked about his environmental concerns. He's an avid hiker, and he's hiked the mountain over 4,000 feet in this state. But he was also a co-sponsor of a bill to expand homicide to unborn children, an attack on Roe versus Wade. He voted to require photo IDs to vote, a suffrage roadblock to elderly and students. He voted to eliminate licensing requirements for carrying a concealed weapon. The senator honors the Second Amendment in the extreme. I like to think I would defend all of the amendments. My worst fear is a bunch of yahoos armed to the teeth who have not been vetted, who have not been checked, defending themselves against imagined fears, as we see in the papers, occurs in other stand-your-ground states. I'm afraid, so I'm defending myself with a gun. I am afraid of people deciding that they will intervene with a gun. Police who are trained, and trained in restraint, I might add, who resort to firing only hit the target about 17%, if you can believe the New York City police statistics, which I think are fairly accurate. So, I don't understand why somebody who is so concerned with business would be so concerned about getting rid of licensing requirements for a concealed weapon. He voted to restrict labor union rights. We've been through that. He voted for right to work. He voted against repeal of the death penalty. I consider the death penalty barbaric and not a real deterrent, and not even a real punishment. Because I can't think of anything worse than waking up every day for the rest of your life in the same gray cell, eating the same institutional food, wearing the same drab uniform, unable to go anywhere, do anything, be locked up with yourself for the rest of your life. That to me is a punishment. The relief of death is not. And a life sentence can be corrected should we find it to be wrong. We cannot adjust for a dead man. Senator Bradley has been a consistent friend of the Tea Party Libertarians. He voted for the O'Brien budgets in 2011. And now he talks about restoring some of those funds as if he should have credit for that. Restoring the funds that he cut. This is what he told us in Wolfboro a few nights ago. This is like the child who takes the cookies and wants forgiveness because, well, I didn't eat the crumbs. Senator Bradley's record has not been nearly as good as he would have you believe. I think it's time for a change in the Senate. Senator Bradley has served for a long time, and his service has been, if not remarkable, at least in the main over the years, has been pretty fair. But lately, Senator, it's time? Yeah. All right, I'll just ask for your vote.
Okay. Mr. Brown?
Try 3 points, see if I can do them. Unlike most of you here, I suspect, I spent 6 years in prison. The difference was I went home every night. The air smells of Clorox. The concrete is gray. There is no grass. There is no bird. There is no sunlight. No stream to walk. No trees. No dog. And it's cheaper than trying to kill somebody and taking credit for that. That's the death penalty. When I was elected to the New Hampshire House, I did not step onto the floor until I took my oath of office. It is a sacred civil space. But social tax policy, easier to talk about. Social welfare programs of the federal government, what percentage of the budget? 0.047 total welfare spending. Seniors get $7 for every $1 that is spent on children in this country. Unemployment insurance benefits stop after 30 weeks. Average time out of work is 32 weeks. And you get taxed on your unemployment insurance benefits at the end of the year. People earning more than $100,000 a year get 50% of all the housing assistance credits in this country. What is the biggest part of the federal budget? Side question. Anybody here pay more money than General Electric did in taxes last year? You can
Yeah,
all
probably all of
raise
us.
your hands.
Yeah.
0. The largest drain on the federal budget is not Social Security, it's not defense, it is corporate loopholes. Health insurance. You just turned 65. Will you get your money back for what you paid in? Answer, yes. On average, $127,000 in Medicare benefits will come back to you. A food stamp supper, about $1.50 per person. And the last one, this will be coming out in the mail. You can't read it at a distance, don't bother. It's a personal thought. That is my granddaughter with me at the Milton Mills 4th of July parade. Her father died of cancer when she was 1. I was in the House. We voted donor match testing for Histriona's bill, HB 1452. It passed with a bipartisan vote in the House and Senate. In 2010, O'Brien-led House voted it back out, voted no on children's health insurance, voted no for public education, and voted no on services to disabled youth. That's the wait list. There are 50,000 people without health insurance, and the Republicans of this district voted no to that as well. My daughter has health insurance. My mother did not. When my father died of cancer, when I was 1, I have lived that difference. I don't vote health insurance away from anyone.
Candace?
I passed out, a couple of things passed out. One of the things passed out that I think is really important, I'm really into the future of farms in New Hampshire. And if you look at the farms, half of the farms in New Hampshire are people who own farms are 60 or older, and no one under 25. If we don't, it's this one, this one here. And so if we don't do something about the farms, and that's one of the things that I just want to raise awareness of. Another thing that brought me into this, running into the office, is something called the Balancing Incentive Program, which I could pull my hair out at. I serve on a number of 7, 8, 9 state councils, all volunteer, all trying to bring forth issues from my community and get them represented. The Balancing Incentive Grant was a grant that New Hampshire was the first state to get it. And they got it in 2012, and they had to use it up within 3 years, and it was $25.7 million. And its purpose was to provide community services and supports so that people did not have to go into nursing homes. You have the list, the circle pie before you that I already gave you on how much goes into nursing homes, and then it comes over a property tax. Well, they set this thing up, and I was the only citizen who was not a stakeholder, in other words, wasn't going to profit from this, that volunteered to serve on this in the state of New Hampshire. They took the money, and the first thing they did with it was they took 12 million of it and decided to train the heads of DHHS. And I said, don't they already know their jobs? And I couldn't understand why this money was going to train them. And then the next thing they did was they took another, and I'm not exact, but it was around 8 million, and they paid UNH. And they paid UNH because they said UNH lost money in the last legislature, so it'd be a good idea to pay UNH to establish, which on here, UNH Center of Aging and Community Living, they call it. And so they managed this. Then what they did next is they took the money, and if you look at the back sheet, you will see their goal is to create their own computer system in the state. And so the $25.7 million that was supposed to go into our communities never went into our communities. This is the kind of thing that I see all the time, that I want to fight. And I will continue to fight, whether I'm elected or not. The next thing you see does not have anything to do with that. This chart is another type of thing that happens in these councils where I'm at. I'm on the Department of Transportation, long-term planning council, and they have used this chart to justify and they can't be changed until 2016, that anybody over 75 should have to pay $600 a year to go to one of the 5 people who specialize in whether people with disabilities can drive. And pay that $600 and find out whether they can drive. Because the elderly are in emergency rooms so often after accidents. And this is their data. Okay, their data comes from 2005 to 2009. And it is based on people who go in the emergency room. And I said, when you're older, you brake easier. You may not have caused the accident at all. Or you may have been a passenger. Where's the data that says who caused the accident? It had never been brought up. I cannot do anything about this till 2016. So I'm fighting that. The last handout I give you, I won't go over, but it is the list of upcoming bills that we know of that you may want to look over and think about as you choose who you want best to represent you, that these are things you need to know about no matter who you vote for. And I thank you very much for listening and your time.
Thank you. Turn to the right side of the table, Mr. Bradley.
Well, thank you very much for moderating this event tonight. Thank you all for being here, giving up your Sunday afternoon. And thank you for the viewers who are watching us at home on TV. It's been an honor for me to have served. I look forward to continuing to serve in the Senate. I think that viewers and listeners here today have seen a pretty clear difference between my good friend Mr. White and myself. And it starts with Mr. White saying not having an income tax in New Hampshire is nonsense. Well, Governor Lynch disagrees with you, Mr. White. Even Governor Hassan disagrees with you, Mr. White. Now, I happen to believe that you have to stand up for taxpayers, and that one of the reasons that Governor Lynch and Governor Hassan agree with me is they believe, like virtually all people in New Hampshire believe, that you can't have an income tax in order to lower other taxes. It just doesn't work that way. State after state has proven that if they've tried to lower real estate taxes with income taxes, taxes just go up. And I find it noteworthy that you keep comparing what would be nirvana in New Hampshire to California. So California, of course, is a very high tax state, and I would note has an unemployment rate that is much higher than New Hampshire's. California's unemployment rate, perhaps you don't know what it is, but it's 7.4%. Ours is 4.3%. So mimicking California in New Hampshire with their legendary budget crises, their high tax policy, their business flight, that's a recipe for disaster, and I think a clear difference between the two of us. You talk about budget cuts that were made in 2011, but you conveniently forget that in 2011, we inherited an $800 million deficit. That was the result of 4 years of 24% increase in spending and about 100 new taxes and fees, some of which had to be repealed because they were so odious. The LLC tax, the camping tax. I fight for taxpayers. I think you fight for larger government. So, a couple of the other things you brought up in your closing. I'm pro-choice, but when somebody assaults a pregnant woman and her baby dies, I think you ought to have enhanced penalties. I do believe in voter ID. I think that we should have clean elections. You have to use your IDs to do an awful lot of things in life. Asking people to use an ID to vote, common sense to me. I believe that we're a lot safer state because we believe in the Second Amendment. in New Hampshire. You obviously don't. And I also believe that there are some crimes that are just simply so heinous that our narrow, very narrow death penalty statute makes sense. But I think the clear difference, and this is what I hope viewers will take away from this, is a difference of leadership. A difference of being able to solve problems, which I've spent years trying to do, whether it was working to lower electric rates when I was in the New Hampshire House, leading efforts for pension reform when property taxpayers were seeing property taxes go through the roof because we had a $5 billion unfunded liability problem, solving that $800 million budget deficit that we had in 2011, and bringing forward in 2013 a bipartisan budget that all 24 senators voted for. We haven't talked much about health care tonight. It's unfortunate because I led efforts to insure those 50,000 people that you talked about, Mr. Brown, to insure them in a way that provides taxpayer protection. We did that, and it was leadership that came from 3 Democratic senators and 3 Republican senators, myself included, to make sure that we got that done. And lastly, I know that it's probably uncomfortable for you, Mr. White, for me to talk about the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard. You've said my efforts to save those 5,000 jobs were ancient history. You know what? There are 5,000 people still working today because, as Foster's Daily Democrat said, in 2005 and 2006, along with Susan Collins and Olympia Snow and Judd Gregg and everybody else in the congressional delegation, Mike Michaud, Tom Allen, even Ted Kennedy, all of us worked together to preserve those 5,000 jobs. There are people working today because of my efforts. Sir, that's not ancient history. And if there's a clear difference between us, it's that I'll fight for jobs and I'll fight for taxpayers, and I'll make sure that we get the job done to meet the needs of the state of New Hampshire as we protect taxpayers. So I thank you for being here this afternoon and look forward to continuing this debate tomorrow night in Tamworth.
All right, thank you. That was a good, stayed within the 5 minutes, thank you. Mr. Mullen.
Thank you, and thank you for moderating again, Susan. Thank you very much for putting this together. I guess my summary here is going to be brief. I certainly am, the key to the state is jobs and growth, and it develops and gives us an opportunity to meet the wants and the needs of our state. And if we don't continue to strive to increase those jobs, good paying jobs, in a variety of ways, we are going to lose. There are many challenges within our state in terms of education, jobs, taxation, health care. And I think over the last 2 years, I've tried to look at those and make decisions on those that I feel are in the best interest of the recipients as well as the taxpayers. The taxpayers are the ones that foot the bill, and I don't think that we are a society here in New Hampshire that is one that does not fulfill our obligations or want to help those who are in need. So I will continue to work for those activities that help us meet those needs. I'm also, as I explained earlier, I'm becoming more of a supporter of school funding. I think we need to look at that. I believe in local controls of schools. Let the parents decide where the children should go. Public school system is fine, but there are individuals, parents who would like to go someplace else. I think we ought to afford them to do that. And in conclusion, really, in terms of our costs to the taxpayers, our energy costs here are extremely high. And we have done little to, matter of fact, we have hindered and increased through regulations and taxes the cost of energy to everybody in the state. We need to do something about our electric rates. We also need to increase our infrastructure for energy to, again, help business be more friendly in this state to allow them to grow. And I have been an honor to serve the 2 years, and I look forward to receiving your vote for the next 2.
Thank you. Ruby?
Well, I was gonna have virtually a very short one before, but there's a number of issues that have been raised. One is about the Second Amendment, and one thing we don't need is more laws and more regulations. Actually, we need less of them. Vermont has had an open carry and no license since 1903, and they're one of the safest states along with us in the whole union. That is a fact. And they are one of the most liberal states, legislative-wise, that you can ever find. And they still uphold and continue to have open carry and no licensing. The business, we need to attract more business. And by attracting more business, and we will keep more of our graduates at high-paying jobs, and they will be capable of affording very good homes and staying here and contributing both themselves through their taxes, personal taxes, and their business. Businesses are good in a number of ways, and I'll use the example that they are open from 8 to 5. They don't use a lot of services, they don't use the schools, they don't use anything. Their employees do when they go home to the various places that they live. And that's why we need to increase and are working with the university system and the community college system to get these good paying STEM jobs and the people who support the STEM jobs. You can have all the engineers in the world you want, but if you have a machine shop and the guy can't read or the woman can't read the drafts, the blueprints, the whole thing falls apart. The death penalty. I voted to increase it in the 2011 and 2012 because of the horrendous thing that happened in Mount Vernon. That was just awful. We do have a very narrow, or did a very narrow death penalty sentencing, and right now we only have one person who was on it, and that is a person who admitted to killing a policeman in Manchester. And but the more I thought about it, my wife and I, we have several relatives that are policemen. Their life is no more valuable than yours. They go into that type of work because they expect to. They have risks that others of us don't get, and yet we still are involved in killings and robberies and various other heinous things and so forth that would, as I say, a capital crime is a capital crime, whether it's you or my grandson or our son. So I voted against it this time, and I believe it either is for everyone, all capital crimes, or it's for no one. The 2000, I agree with Jeff Bradley. When I was elected in 2010, and for the 2011, we were faced with some tremendous deficits. One was the everyday budget of it. We were in a deficit of $800 million. Our public funding, and I disagree, we're another $1 billion in the hole. It's $6 billion for our public health care and retirement for the fire and police. And that has to change also, because the people like my grandson who were in it, there'll be nothing left for them when he goes to retire in another 20 years. And one of the things that I think about the taxes is that, believe it or not, I go back to Steve Ford. He had a wonderful idea of a flat tax for everyone, whether it's you, me, business, or whatever. That thing about General Electric is absurd. There's no reason a company like that should pay no taxes at all. None. So thereby a flat tax, whether it's 2% or 10% or 50%, everybody pays the same tax and is treated exactly the same. Now, to get to another thing about the university system. The university system of New Hampshire has, in this last biennium, frozen in-state tuition for the 2 years. That cost the state of New Hampshire, the taxpayers, $50 million. To go back to the 2011 and 2012, we cut $48 million from their budget, the university system. Because we were so far in debt, we had to do something. And we do have a balanced budget in our Constitution. It wasn't nice for everyone. It wasn't the best thing to do. There are social services that need to go on and that ultimately do save us a lot of money. If you spend $1, for instance, for, well, anyway, there's a great organization in Stratford County that does court intervention and helps with their clients. They have 20,000 clients in this state, in this county alone. For every $1 that we spend with them, comes back to us in, we'll say, $10. But if you don't have the $10 or the $1 to give them, then what good is it? You have to live within your means. The university system. So then they said, if you will put back the $50 million, which makes it level funded, back at $100 million, which is what we gave them for a number of years, we will freeze in-state tuition, even though they had gone up every year prior to that for over 20 years. They had gone up on their tuition. Now, something didn't make sense there. The other thing is, they've made some changes in their administration of the university system of New Hampshire. One is the gentleman that was there was a typical big business, big government. At one point during his tenure, I believe that he had somewhere up with 100 employees. That wasn't what the university system was created for. And under the new chancellor, and I introduced a bill to eliminate the university system in 2011 and again in 2013. I'm not going to do it this time. I have met with the new chancellor and his financial advisor, and if it wasn't worthwhile, why have they eliminated 25 jobs in less than 2 years? So those are a few of the issues, but that's in-state tuition freezing. They cost $50 million. And they said they'll do it for another 2 years if we give them another $100 million. Doesn't make sense after increasing it for 20 years straight.
Thank you, Linda.
Thank you.
All right, that concludes today's candidate forum. I want to thank all the candidates for being civil to not only to the topics but to each other, for coming prepared. It was obvious to me that they didn't take this lightly, that they all came prepared to answer the questions, and I'd like to thank everyone who attended.
And for your superior moderation.
No. That's a gift from someone else. Thank you.
Thank you.